r/NoSleep. Posted by you/this statistician 473. Please don't whistle past midnight. I don't have much time. If you're reading this, please, take my warning seriously. Never whistle past midnight. I made that mistake, and now it's coming for me. I can hear it getting closer with every second. About a month ago, I moved into an old house on the outskirts of town. The locals warned me about strange occurrences in the area, but I shrugged it off as small-town superstition. Whistling has always been a habit of mine, something I picked up from my grandfather. It was a way to fill the silence and keep myself company. But after what happened, I regret every note. My wife got a fantastic job opportunity in Texas, so we packed up and moved into this big, beautiful house. It seemed perfect for us and our 2 daughters, Emily, who's 10, and Anne, who's 6. The house was at the end of a quiet street, bordered by thick woods that added a touch of tranquility to our new home. One night, I was up late working on my laptop. My job doesn't require me to be in person, so I often find myself burning the midnight oil at home. To keep myself entertained, I started whistling a tune my grandfather used to hum. It was past midnight, and the house was silent except for the tapping of my keys and the soft whistle of my tune. That's when I heard it, a faint whistling sound, almost like an echo, coming from outside. I stopped whistling and listened intently, but there was nothing. I shook my head, thinking I was just tired, and resumed my work. A few minutes later, I started whistling again, and this time, the echo was closer, clearer. I stopped once more, my heart pounding slightly. It had to be my imagination, right? The next morning, Emily mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Daddy, I heard you whistling outside my window last night. Were you there?" I tried to dismiss it, telling her it was probably just the wind or her imagination playing tricks on her. But deep down, I felt a gnawing unease. Over the next few nights, the whistling continued. Each time I heard it, it seemed to be getting closer and more insistent. One particularly unsettling night, I decided to stop whistling altogether, hoping to put an end to the strange echoes. But even after I stopped, the whistling continued, echoing through the house with a life of its own. It felt like a domino effect had been set in motion, and there was no stopping it. The more I tried to ignore it, the louder and more persistent it became. Shadows began to move just out of the corner of my eye, and cold spots appeared in random places, sending shivers down my spine. The air in the house grew thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. My wife started complaining about the temperature fluctuations, and strange drafts seemed to come from nowhere. One night, as we were putting the girls to bed, Anne tugged on my sleeve with a worried look on her face. "Daddy, I heard you outside my window last night. You were telling me to come outside. Why did you do that?" Hearing this made the blood drain from my face. Her innocent eyes looked up at me, expecting a simple explanation, but her words sent chills down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced a smile. "Sweetie, I would never ask you to come outside at night. If you hear something like that again, don't listen. Just stay in your room and call for mommy or me, okay?" I could see the confusion and fear in her eyes, and I hated that I couldn't give her a better answer. As I kissed her goodnight and turned off the light, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. The atmosphere in the house grew tense and heavy, like an invisible weight pressing down on us. It was as if something malevolent was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The night was unusually cold, and despite my resolution to never whistle again after midnight, I awoke to the haunting melody piercing the silence. My heart raced as I recognized the tune. It was the same one I used to calm Anne when she couldn't sleep. Panic gripped me as I realized the whistling was coming from Anne's room. I stumbled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch as dread coiled in my stomach. The hallway felt longer than ever, shadows stretching and dancing ominously on the walls. When I reached Anne's door, my hand shook as I turned the knob. The room was bathed in an eerie blue glow from the moonlight streaming through the open window. The curtain billowed like a ghostly specter, and the whistling seemed to swirl around me, echoing off the walls. "Anne?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer but the incessant wind and the haunting melody. I rushed to the window and peered out into the darkness, praying to see her small form playing innocently in the yard. But the lawn was empty, bathed in an unsettling stillness that chilled me to the bone. "Anne," I shouted into the night, desperation creeping into my voice. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized she was gone. A primal fear took hold of me, urging me to do something, anything to bring her back. Frantically, I searched the room, hoping against hope that she was hiding somewhere, playing a game. But the room remained silent, save for the mournful whistle that now seemed to mock my helplessness. With trembling hands, I dialed 911, barely able to speak as I reported my daughter missing. The police arrived swiftly, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness outside. I stumbled to meet them at the door, my voice hoarse with panic as I tried to explain what had happened. They listened gravely as I recounted the eerie whistling, Anne's disappearance, and the chilling silence that now enveloped the house. They conducted a thorough search, combing every inch of the property, inside and out. I watched with a sinking heart as they checked Anne's room, dusted for fingerprints, and scrutinized the open window where the curtain still swayed in the breeze. "There's no sign of forced entry," one of the officers muttered, his brow furrowed in confusion. "And no trace of the girl." "But she was here," I insisted, my voice pleading. "I heard the whistling coming from her room. It called her outside." The police investigation yielded no new leads, leaving us with a haunting silence and a home that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. After their thorough search turned up nothing, the officers suggested we stay in a motel to ensure our safety. Reluctantly, we agreed, packing a few belongings and leaving the empty house behind. The drive to the motel was tense. Emily sat in the back seat, silent and withdrawn, while my wife gripped my hand tightly, her eyes filled with unshed tears. I tried to distract myself by turning on the radio, hoping the familiar strains of music would ease the suffocating dread that weighed on us all. But as soon as the radio crackled to life, the music abruptly cut off, replaced by a haunting whistle that seemed to emanate from the speakers themselves. My heart skipped a beat, and I glanced at my wife and daughter, both frozen in fear. "Daddy," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. I reached for the radio dial, frantically trying to change the station, but the whistling persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. It filled the car, drowning out the sounds of traffic and the hum of the engine. Panic clotted my chest as I realized the whistling was not coming from the radio, it was coming from outside the car, surrounding us like a sinister presence. "Make it stop," my wife pleaded, her voice choking with tears. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, desperate to escape the haunting melody that seemed to follow us wherever we went. The motel loomed ahead, its neon sign flickering in the darkness like a beacon of false hope. As we pulled into the parking lot, the whistling abruptly ceased, leaving us gasping for breath in its wake. The air felt heavy and oppressive, thick with the lingering presence of whatever malevolent force had taken Anne from us. The air inside the cramped motel room hung heavy with the weight of our shared fear and grief. Emily lay curled up on one of the beds, her eyes wide and watchful despite her exhaustion. My wife and I sat on the edge of the other bed, our hands tightly clasped as we stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. "We need to stay awake," my wife whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. "We can't let it take Emily too." I nodded, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I won't let that happen," I vowed, my voice cracking with emotion. "We'll keep her safe." I glanced at Emily, who shifted uneasily in her sleep, her small frame shivering under the thin motel blanket. How could I protect her from something I couldn't even see or understand? The night stretched on, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. We took turns patrolling the room, checking and double-checking the locks on the door and windows. The whistling had stopped for now, but its echoes lingered in our minds like a sinister lullaby. Hours passed in agonizing silence, broken only by the occasional distant sound of passing cars. My eyelids grew heavy with exhaustion, the weight of sleep pulling at me like a siren's call. Beside me, my wife fought to stay awake, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. Just as I felt myself slipping into an uneasy doze, a faint melody began to drift through the room. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of tired senses and frayed nerves. But as the tune grew louder and more distinct, I realized with a sickening dread that it was real. The whistling had returned. I shot upright, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the room for any sign of the intruder. Emily stirred, her eyes fluttering open in confusion. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice tinged with fear. "It's okay," I reassured her, though my own voice trembled. "Stay here with Mommy. Don't move." I crept toward the window, my hands shaking as I peered into the darkness beyond. The whistling seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding us like a suffocating shroud. My wife joined me at the window, her breath catching in her throat as she listened to the haunting melody. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice filled with dread. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the whistling. "But it wants us to hear it." We stood there, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, as the whistling grew louder and more insistent. It wrapped around us like a malevolent embrace, its eerie melody weaving through the walls of the motel room. As the haunting tune continued, I felt a strange drowsiness washing over me, pulling at my eyelids like lead weights. My wife swayed on her feet, her grip on my arm weakening. "We have to stay awake," she mumbled, her words slurred with exhaustion. But the melody seemed to have a hypnotic effect, lulling us into a false sense of security. Against my will, I felt myself sinking to the floor, my thoughts becoming sluggish and disjointed. "Daddy?" Emily's voice pierced through the fog in my mind. "What's happening?" I struggled to stay conscious, to fight against the overwhelming urge to sleep. But the melody whispered sweet promises of rest and relief, urging me to surrender. "Daddy," Emily called again, her voice tinged with desperation. Through half-closed eyes, I saw Emily standing by the door, her small figure silhouetted against the dim light of the motel room. Her eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Daddy, it's calling me," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "No, Emily, don't listen." I managed to choke out, but my words were feeble and distant. The melody spoke with my voice, its words twisted and distorted into a haunting echo of my own. It promised safety and comfort, urging Emily to step closer, to open the door, to follow its call. I tried to move, to reach out to her, but my limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. My wife lay motionless on the floor beside me, her breathing shallow and uneven. With a final, desperate effort, I forced myself to stand. "Emily, come back," I shouted, but my voice was barely a whisper against the overpowering melody. And then, with a heartbreaking clarity, I watched as Emily reached for the door handle. The room seemed to spin around me as she stepped into the darkness beyond, swallowed by the haunting melody that had stolen my voice and my strength. I woke abruptly, gasping for air as I jolted upright on the motel room floor. The last thing I remembered was the haunting melody filling the room, lulling us into a dangerous stupor. My heart raced with panic as I scanned the dimly lit space. "Sarah!" I called out urgently, scrambling to my feet. Beside me, Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open with groggy confusion. What happened?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Emily," I choked out, fear gripping my chest like a vice. "She's gone." The realization hit us like a physical blow. Emily, our precious daughter, had vanished. The room felt colder, emptier than before, as the reality of our nightmare sank in. "We have to find her," Sarah said, her voice trembling with raw panic. Nodding grimly, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 once again, my fingers shaking as I recounted Emily's disappearance and our harrowing night at the motel. The operator's words were sympathetic but offered no immediate solace. Our daughter was missing, and time was slipping away. "We have to do something," Sarah whispered, her voice strained with desperation. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "Let's go back to the house," I suggested, my voice tight with resolve. "Maybe we missed something. Maybe there's a clue we didn't see." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," she agreed, her voice wavering but determined. The drive back home was a blur of fear and urgency. Sarah sat beside me, clutching my hand in a vice-like grip, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as tears streaked down her face. Emily's absence weighed heavily on us, the haunting melody still echoing in our minds like a relentless specter. "Why is this happening to us?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with anguish. "What did we do to deserve this?" I glanced at her, my own heart heavy with guilt and fear. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hollow. "But I think I might be the reason." Sarah turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself to reveal the terrible truth. "The whistling. I think it's because of me," I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I used to whistle late at night, and now it's taken our daughters." Sarah stared at me, her expression a mix of confusion and dawning horror. "But why would that matter?" "I don't know," I replied, shaking my head in frustration. "But every time I whistled, it seemed to get closer and closer. Now they're both gone." As we pulled into our driveway, the once inviting facade of our home now loomed ominously against the backdrop of the early morning sky. The air felt heavy with a palpable sense of foreboding, as if the very walls held secrets we were not meant to uncover under the dim light of dawn. "We need to check every inch of this place," Sarah declared, her voice wavering but resolute. "There has to be something we missed." I nodded, my throat tight with anxiety. "Let's split up. You search upstairs, and I'll check downstairs in the backyard. We have to find something, anything, that could lead us to Ann and Emily. Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks with trembling hands. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. I forced a reassuring smile and squeezed her hand before heading toward the back door. The backyard stretched out before me, bathed in the soft hues of the rising sun. Shadows cast by the trees danced eerily along the edges of the lawn, and a chill wind rustled the leaves. I searched frantically, calling Ann and Emily's names into the gathering light, hoping against hope for any sign of them. But the backyard remained empty and silent, save for the distant sound of crickets chirping. As I turned to head back inside, a strange sensation washed over me, a prickling on the back of my neck as if someone were watching. I dismissed it as paranoia, my nerves frayed from the night's events. Back inside, I began methodically checking each room on the ground floor. The living room, the kitchen, the dining area, all devoid of any clues. Anxiety gnawed at my insides as I moved through the house, the fear of what we might find, or not find, clinging to every step. Then, as I entered the hallway leading to the basement stairs, I heard it, a voice that sounded unmistakably like mine, calling out faintly from somewhere below. "Sarah," it said, the timbre and cadence almost perfect, but somehow off in a chilling way. My heart skipped a beat. How could this be? I hadn't spoken. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, something was mimicking me, luring Sarah into a trap. Thinking quickly, I grabbed my phone and sent Sarah a text message. "Don't listen to any voice you hear that sounds like me. It's not me. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." I prayed she would see it in time. Sarah, already walking downstairs, answered the voice she thought was mine. "John?" Her voice echoed faintly down the hallway. As she entered the basement, the door shut behind her. My heart sank as I heard her response. I sprinted down the hallway. It seemed longer than I had remembered, miles long. Taking the steps two at a time, desperate to reach her before it was too late. The house seemed to hold its breath, every creak and rustle amplified in the silence that followed. "Sarah, don't," I shouted, bursting through the basement door. But there was no reply. The only sound was the stillness of the house, a heavy silence that filled the space where Sarah's voice had been. Realizing my entire family was gone, I stumbled back upstairs, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As I reached the top landing, a haunting sound filled the air, a faint whistle, echoing through the empty house. It wasn't just in my head anymore, it was real, manifesting itself within these walls, mocking me, taunting me with its sinister presence. Terror gripped me, and without thinking, I dashed into my bedroom. My heart pounded as I hid in the closet, the darkness offering little comfort against the encroaching dread. The whistling grew louder, closer, its melody twisting into an eerie refrain that seemed to seep through the walls themselves, drawing nearer with each haunting note. And now, as I frantically scribble these words, the whistling returns. It pierces the silence like a knife, chilling me to the bone. It's right outside the closet door, its presence palpable, its intent clear. It's here for me now, so please don't take this as a joke. It's a warning, please don't whistle past midnight.